Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on any purchase over $10. See the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and Wizards of the Coast shared some new information on Ravnica Allegiance today. We're going to break it all down for you. A number of new cards, 5 altogether. Some are promo cards and some are from the regular set, showcasing new mechanics. And aside from that, we got a better look at those promo cards that we saw earlier in the week, so I'll show you those pictures. Also packaging pictures, a lot to dig into here. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support the channel, one of which is our Patreon page. You're also going to find product links on Amazon down below. Anything you buy once you go through that initial link will get a small percentage for the channel. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. Hopefully you can save some cash while you support us. And as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to each and every one of you. I appreciate y'all. Well, let's get into today's information. We'll start off with some packaging. Here's the Deck Builder's Toolkit, and that appears to be maybe Exava representing the Rakdos Guild there. Kia is on the bundle pack. I'm really interested to see her role in Ravnica and how she relates to Orzhov, because I said a few months back when we were looking at Guilds of Ravnica cards originally that if there were some flicker effects in this set, there could be some really powerful synergies. Kind of wonder if she's going to bring the flicker. Could have an impact on Standard. Who knows? That's a big leap. I know we haven't even seen the cards yet, but kind of interested in what's going to happen there. Also, Lavinia appears to be on the actual booster box on the right side there. Here's the art from the actual booster packs, and one thing that stood out to me was that 4th pack right there. Looks like we're going to see Domri Raid again. And here's further confirmation of that with the Planeswalker decks featuring Dovin and Domri. So my assumption is, much like we've seen in the past, there'll be special Planeswalker deck versions of these two Planeswalkers that will come within these products, and then the set will most likely have a different version of each of these characters. Again, looking forward to see what these bring to the table. Okay, let's move on to the promo cards, beginning with the 6 that we already discussed on the channel, and I'll link the videos at the end of this one in case you need to catch up. There's also a playlist on the channel, so I'm not going to talk in detail about these 6 cards. But let's take a look at them now that we have better pictures. This is the Haunt of Hightower, and yes, indeed, it is the Buy a Box promo. This will not be in the regular set. You won't find this in booster packs. You can only get this by buying a box, as long as supplies last, at your local game store. Rakdos Firewheeler. We saw this one the other day, but the art was obscured by a sticker. Finally, we get a better look at the art here. This is the Open House promo. Simic Ascendancy is the Draft Weekend promo, as we've known from before. We'll move on to the Friday Night Magic promos with Growth Spiral. Here's Mortify. Light Up the Stage. Alright, we talked about this one the other day too, but I do want to spend a moment on it because we now know what Spectacle is. It states the following. You may cast the spell for its Spectacle cost rather than its mana cost if an opponent lost life this turn. Okay, so in a multiplayer game of Commander, for example, that's any opponent will turn on the opportunity for me to use a spell at the Spectacle cost. And it also is loss of life that they're mentioning here, not damage. So keep that in mind. If I damage an opponent, sure, that counts. So if a creature gets by and they take damage from my creature, then that could turn on the Spectacle cost. Also, though, if they decide to pay life for an effect, that works as well. Maybe I hit them with some sort of sorcery or instant that's going to do damage. That's another way that it could get turned on. Maybe they play a shock land and shock themselves. That also turns it on. However, you got to remember that even if they do take damage, you still have to follow the rules of the card. This one is a sorcery, for example, so I can only play it when I can play a sorcery. Even if my opponent does decide to play a shock land and shock themselves on their own turn, I can't play this for the Spectacle cost or the regular cost because it is a sorcery. So the rules don't change in that way. However, if it's my turn and I damage the opponent some way, somehow, then of course I can just pay the 1 red as opposed to the red and 2 for this card. And it is cast and will count towards anything looking for spells to be cast. Moving on, we got to look at the Ravnica weekend lands, which you can get for participating in those events. And this is the Azorius combination. One thing to remember, though, these most likely will be the same lands that we get in the new guild kits coming up. Those won't be in foil there, of course, but we're also kind of getting the first look at those lands now, too. We have Orzhov. Here's Rakdos. Gruul. And finally, Simic. We're going to move on now to 2 more promo cards that we have yet to see. The first one is the Store Championship promo. It's Lavinia Azorius Renegade, designated as a rare, white and blue legendary creature human soldier 2/2. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. Whenever an opponent casts the spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Okay, let's look at a few nuances on this hate bear before we continue. First thing you need to know, it's not reciprocal, so the impact is to your opponents and not to you. That's pretty sweet. Secondly, the first part, each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of lands that player controls. So if you ramp into creatures, you're good, right? Your opponent can still ramp into creatures all day long. This doesn't stop them. They can use mana rocks, they can use their Llanowar elves, whatever. So if you're up against, say, a mono green Snobby deck or something, this is probably not going to be all that good for you. Now, it is non-creature spells, which does mean it impacts things like Planeswalkers off Tron lands, for example. So if I'm trying to put Karn out there using my Tron lands, I might be having a bad day. The second part, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. Notice that it can actually stop creatures in this case. So it's not non-creature spell, but any spell that you try to cast, if you're casting it for free for some reason, can't do it anymore. So that does impact any free creatures you're trying to put out there or anything else. But notice it says cast. I can still cheat things into play. So if something is going from my graveyard into the battlefield, going from my hand into the battlefield, going from exile into the battlefield, this card does not stop that. It only stops things I'm trying to cast for no mana. So that does get a little tricky. It doesn't stop everything, obviously. There are some weaknesses here, which is a good thing considering the casting cost and all. But it does disrupt some things. Definitely Storm might not want to see this on the battlefield depending on the Storm build. Remember, you don't cast the Storm copies, but the Storm count process could be slowed down. I mentioned Tron already. This is another card that hoses Tron. Does this see play in competitive formats? Vintage, Legacy, Modern, probably out of sideboards in some capacity, I think. Again, in Modern, I'm thinking if I'm in Azorius or Jeskai control, maybe I try this out, see how it works against Tron. This also disrupts Cascade on cards like Bloodbraid Elf. In Legacy or Vintage, there are more free spells to slow down with something like this. Consider Force of Will, for example. This might be a nice card in Control Mirrors, as a matter of fact. There are a lot of hose cards out there. There's been a lot of new ones recently. Is this one better than some of the others? Well, with the casting cost being two different colors, that does make it a little more difficult to work into a lot of places, but it could still see play, I think, at least out of some sideboards. In Standard, this does slow down a few things, like treasure token use, for example, if you're trying to cast a non-creature spell using those tokens. Convoke is another thing that could get slowed down by this. For the most part, I don't see it having a huge influence if you were to look at today's meta, other than maybe slowing down a card like March of the Multitudes. You might not be able to have a huge play with that card like you normally would if this was on the battlefield. Other than that, I like when they print answers for Standard. I'd rather have an answer and no problem than the problem and no answers, so this is very welcome in my opinion. Limited, does it do anything there? Well, I don't know. Draft or Sealed, we haven't seen a lot of the set yet. Maybe there's things that this will disrupt, and if that's the case, wonderful. Maybe it's played out of the sideboard, but it's still a 2/2 for 2, even if it is two different colors. That's not the worst thing in the world either. I do think this is interesting in Commander. It probably won't live long. It's rather fragile, of course, but it could definitely disrupt some strategies within that environment for sure. Gate Colossus is our League promo. This is going to cost 8, Artifact Creature Construct Uncommon 8/8. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature you control. Now, this can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, so that's pretty interesting. Whenever a gate enters the battlefield under your control, you may put Gate Colossus from your graveyard on top of your library. So that is a may. You don't have to do that, so keep that in mind. But it's an option. There are times it will make sense, times it won't make sense. Now, the other thing to remember, the card we just saw actually could slow down this card or mess you up if you have too many gates in play. Although that would be a lot of gates, but that's kind of interesting anyway. Now, aside from that, what do I do with this card? Well, it's very reminiscent of some of the cards we saw in Guilds of Ravnica, which were the Gate Matters cards. And typically what those amounted to was I'm in a draft and halfway through pack 2, I start to panic because I just can't get the right cards passed to me. I can't seem to zero in on a guild. The draft is going really bad. I need a fallback plan. I just start taking gates and those Gate Matters cards, and at least I try to build something. Well, maybe that's all this will be in this set, but I do feel like this is actually a strong card in its own right. And even if I just have a few guild gates to help me get this out a little sooner or other ways to ramp, an 8/8 is very sizable. It does not have evasion or trample or anything like that, unfortunately, but it is big board presence, and the ability that it can't be blocked by a creature power 2 or less does make it harder to deal with. You can't block this with like a 6/6 and a 2/2. A lot of times that's how you hold back these big creatures, right? Not with another 8/8 of your own, but with some smaller creatures. In this case, that isn't always going to work out. If your opponent has some 3/3s, they can chump block maybe for a few turns by themselves time. But other than that, they could find themselves in a situation where this is just going to overrun them quicker than it normally would if it didn't have that ability. The last bit of text also can make this a persistent threat at times, although it is a little bit slow. I'm not saying this is a first pickable card in most draft packs or anything like that, but I do think it's decent, better than maybe some of the Gate Matters cards we saw in the previous set. In Standard, I do think there's too many efficient ways to exile this for it to have too much of an impact, but who knows, maybe if we get a reprint of like Maze's End or something in this set or a future set, maybe at some point there'll be enough cards to build a Gate deck? I don't know, we'll see, I guess. There's also a Commander Gate strategy that you see, this will fit right in there. Okay, let's move on to 2 new cards that are not promo cards. Rick's Mahdi Reveler. It's going to cost a red and 1 Human Shaman. This one is a rare 2/2. Spectacle cost of a red, a black, and 2. When this enters the battlefield, discard a card, then draw a card. You must discard a card if you have one, but if you don't, you still get to draw. And if you paid the spectacle cost, instead discard your hand and draw 3 cards. This is pretty interesting to me, especially since we saw Light Up the Stage earlier in the week. These are both cards with spectacle cost, which is going to reward you in some ways for doing damage, that are letting you see more cards in your deck. Red decks need that. Burn decks, aggro decks that are more dependent on creatures, what have you, they can run out of gas sometimes. Like you're doing a lot of early damage and then you draw into a few lands and all of a sudden your opponent starts coming back. This is nice because I can play this 2/2 for 2 and get some board presence, throw away one of these extra lands and go a card deeper in my deck. Not bad for 2 mana. Beyond that, later in the game, if I'm in Rakdos colors and I have more mana at my disposal, I can pitch a bunch of cards in my hand that I don't need, like lands, or maybe I don't have anything in my hand at that point, and draw 3 more cards, and also get board presence of a 2/2. That's actually pretty sweet for 4, right? So I do think this will see standard play. Red has been a powerful color. These type of cards just make it a little bit better. They push aggro. We've seen Boros aggro decks. We've seen mono red aggro decks do well in this past season. This could complement those, or you might see Rakdos decks or Dark Jeskai emerging. This is definitely one to keep an eye on. In Limited, this is a great card too. It's a bear with upside. You know how I feel about those. Great in draft, great in sealed. If you play it for the spectacle cost, wonderful. If you don't, there's still value there. Rafter Demon. Okay, this one's a common. Red, black, and 2. Demon 4/2. Spectacle cost is a red, black, and 3, so 1 more. When this enters the battlefield, if its spectacle cost was paid, each opponent discards a card. And I'm not excited about this one. I don't like 4/2s for 4. They're going to trade down a lot of the time in Limited. There's too many 2/2s for 2 or 2/1s for 2. They're just going to trade for this 4-drop. I don't like that. Spectacle's interesting. I mean, you pay 1 more. Opponent gets to choose and discard a card. That might be hurtful some of the time, but not all of the time. If they have an extra land in their hand, later in the game they might not have any cards in their hand. Or even they might find a benefit for discarding a card. And who knows what some of these other guilds will be doing. We'll find out more later in the week. But maybe Orzhov will have a reason that you want stuff in the graveyard. Who knows? So at this point, it's a little too early to call how good that ability is. But overall, for the casting cost, I don't really like this card, even for draft or sealed. This is Tithe Taker. We're going to see the mechanic from Orzhov here. It costs a white and 1, Human Soldier, rare 2/1. During your turn, spells your opponents cast cost 1 more to cast, and abilities your opponents activate cost 1 more to activate, unless they're mana abilities. Afterlife 1. When this creature dies, create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. Okay, that's a lot to take in. So let's talk about the card a little bit first, then we'll talk about Afterlife some more. The card itself I think is pretty good. In Limited, I'd be happy to play this. A 2/1 for 2 with that Afterlife mechanic, and it slows down my opponent if they want to play an instant or an ability on my turn. Wonderful. Good enough for 2 mana. Really happy with this. Maybe even first pickable in certain draft packs. Aside from that in Standard, I do think it could see some play there. I could imagine that maybe we're going to see Abzan tokens now that we know that Afterlife is the mechanic for Orzhov. This might be a good card out of the sideboard to slow down the control builds that have been doing very well, like Jeskai Control, for example. That might just be the main role of this card going forward in Standard. Could this see play in other places? I don't know, maybe Death and Taxes. I just feel like there's so many other cards that are a little more efficient. The biggest issue here is it does make things a little more difficult for your opponent, but only on your turn. So they have to finesse that a little bit. Like, it's annoying if they want to crack a fetch on your turn or something like that, but I don't think it's the end of the world for them if they can't do it at that given moment 99% of the time. So I don't think this is going to disrupt things as much in the bigger formats as some other cards that already exist out there. Kind of the same thing in Commander. Like, it's interesting, but I think there's a lot better ways to do stuff like this in Commander. You just have more options out there. Overall, though, I really like the Afterlife mechanic. Seems like a great defense against board sweeps for starters. Notice it's Afterlife 1, which we'll probably see Afterlife 1 or 2 or 3 or what have you. 1/1 flyers are hard to deal with. If you're just playing fair magic even, just putting some creatures out that eventually are going to turn into 1/1 flyers, very, very difficult to deal with. Look at Doom Traveler. I mean, that was a great card, a real simple version of this concept. And who knows what other Afterlife cards we're going to see out there that might have other abilities attached to them and such. This has the potential to be very good. Alright, with that being said, those are the cards for today. It does appear that we're going to get more previews throughout the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So as we see more cards, I will report them out to you. But until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.